G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza and this is a video tutorial on how to draw people on difficult angles. The topic of this tutorial was voted on by you guys, and if you want to go vote on the next tutorial, make sure to check out the link on the screen and in the description to go vote on a future tutorial. And then of course, before I jump straight into it, I want to let you know that I have limited capacity to put stuff in a video. There's only so many things I can cover in one video and keep it simple and straightforward and enjoyable to watch. But for those of you who are really trying to jump into the depths of drawing the head, whether it be the features of the face on different angles, and then of course the body, and those of you who want to further your understanding of the human anatomy and muscle structures, I have a couple of books that may be of interest to you. One is called Fun with Faces and the other is called Easy Anatomy. Fun with Faces further covers drawing the head on different angles, but really dives into the depths of drawing features of the face and creating masculine and feminine looks using character archetypes and so on. And then Easy Anatomy breaks down the extremely complicated, sometimes convoluted process of learning and understanding how to draw human anatomy into something much more approachable. So make sure to go check out those ebooks. They're under $10 each and it's a really great way to support me in my work. So I much appreciate that. So now jumping straight into it, here we have an example of a human head. So the first thing I'm going to look at is the raw basic construction of the shapes of the head, and then we're going to look at some of the lines and angles of the head and face in relationship to each other, and then how they are translated on different angles. So to do this, I'm going to shrink my buddy over here and whack him over the side here, and I'm going to reproduce a head over here, but using some fundamental steps. The first step, and this is nearly always the first step that I use when I draw a head, is to draw a circle. The next thing I like to do is either add a jaw or a direction line. It depends what sort of angle you're doing. For straightforward angles, let's say if you're doing a front face, I usually like to just sort of add on the jaw and then add the direction line, or vice versa, it doesn't really matter. But when you're doing more extreme angles, it can be useful to start drawing in the direction line first, because the jaw can sort of shape itself in conjunction with that. So the jaw has sort of a flat tip at the very end. From the side of the face on this 3/4 angle, it just sort of drops straight down. But as you can see, as we follow along this more side view of the jaw here, it goes along on a more horizontal plane and then juts straight up into where the ear will go. Another thing to note is that the head is actually elongated towards the back. So it's good to remember that when you draw 3/4 and side views, just to pop the back of the skull a little bit further back. Then finally we add the center line for the eye line, and then that's basically the construction of our head done. Some people like to further refine the construction lines of their face to be easier to follow. For example, drawing this line along the side here to sort of differentiate the side of the cranium from the front of the cranium, and it also helps sort of signify and remind the artist that the sides of the head are a little flatter than the round aspects of the front of the face. And then sometimes people also like to start shaping in the silhouette of the side of the face at this point too. Now I'm going to add in a couple more aspects of construction. The reason I'm going to do this is because these are going to be some things that are very heavily affected by the angle that the head is on. The first and most obvious one is the nose. We have this thing that pokes out of the center of the face. And you can, as a construction sort of thing, just draw a bit of a block on the tip of the face like that. And then the other aspects of the face that sort of are molded by the angle can be this eye section here. So I sometimes can rough in the eye section like that. And then we have the ear. Those are the major sections. They're the major aspects of the face that, depending on the angle of the face, are really affected in their shape. Now I'm going to grab another color here just to specify the areas of most change, one of which is the bottom of the nose. Now we don't often pay much attention to the shape of the bottom of the nose. It actually has this interesting sort of shape that goes out and then up and then down like that. This is like a bottom up view of the nose, and then we have the nostrils. But we're so used to drawing the nose on a front on or side on perspective that we sort of can forget about that shape, and that's going to come into play later on. Next we have the jaw. I'm going to break the jaw into 3 separate lines. The first is this front chin line. Next, we have this jawline, which is the first half of the jaw that goes right up to this little pointy bit that then juts up into the ear. So if we break it down into these three areas, this too is something that comes into play in a fairly extreme way when the angle of the head changes. Then of course we have the ridge of the brow, and then the ears, and then other aspects of the face change as well, but these are the main things: the brow, the nose, and the jaw. So now let's look at drawing the head on different angles. To begin with, we're just going to do the same 3/4 angle, but we're going to have the head looking up slightly. We start off with the same circle, and then we can add in our direction line, but this time we're going to have a bit of an angle as the head looks up. I find it's easiest to first outline the eye line and center line of the face before we figure out the angle of the jaw, and then also first focus on the downwards, more vertical lines of the face and jaw. Next, I outline where the end of the chin goes, and then I put in the lines that connect these areas of the head. Okay, so now I have three examples of some more dramatic head angles. The first one, this one in the middle, is a little more straightforward, and then the top one is quite extreme, and then the bottom one is fairly extreme as well. These are examples as to how I draw the construction lines of drawing extreme angles. So we'll go into detail in the things that I sort of focus on to get the basics of the construction in place. But the cool thing to keep in mind when you do it this way is that you've created a space on which you can then draw your character, add the detail, and refine the features of the face that you've just drawn. So it's not incredibly pretty, but you get the idea. There is a face here on a pretty extreme angle that if it were in a page in a comic book of a character looking up at Superman or whatever, it's believable enough. And you can see what it is. It's a head turned up on a very extreme angle. But for now, I'll hide that little character that I drew in there. That was just to sort of demonstrate the purpose of these construction lines. But now I want to just further define what it is that I've focused on to create these extreme angles. The first tool I used is the relationship between the end of the jaw and then this line of the face. On all of these angles, the more extreme the angle, the greater the squash. I've drawn to signify the top of the forehead, the middle where the eye line is, and then that jawline. And you can see on the very high angle, there is a greater distance between the eye line and the jaw, the tip of the chin, than there is between the eye line and the forehead. And then as you go down, it eventually becomes even to the point where here in this central example, we have that distance being pretty straightforward. And then as the angle goes down, that distance is decreased and then increased between the eye line and the top of the forehead. This is an element of perspective, and anyone who knows how to draw perspective lines and then create, let's say, lamp posts along a street, you'll know that things get further apart the closer to you they become. So once you've figured out the position of the end of the chin, the next thing to figure out is this angle of the jawline. These three lines that we specified here, this one, and this one, and this one. The interesting thing about these three lines is that on most dramatic angles, this line, the one that protrudes directly underneath the ear, always goes down, and the chin is always flat to the front of the face. And this one between them is always a little bit tricky to figure out, because on this angle, everything kind of has an inwards angle. Whereas as the angle goes up, the first one is an inwards angle, but then when it reaches the chin, it sort of becomes an outwards angle, and that's because we're showing the underneath area of the jaw. This is even more prominent here on this angle. The tip of the chin, and then the line that goes all the way up to the bottom of the jaw where it protrudes out from under the ear, is quite an extreme angle and a shape within itself. And an area that is often ignored is this line here, the connection of this underneath jaw area. Underneath the jaw is a shape in itself. We pointed out earlier that the nose has a shape of its own underneath. The jaw too has that sort of shape. And if I was to draw it kind of, if the jaw area was see-through here, there's this whole area like this, where this curve connects to the neck. And the area that connects the jaw to the neck is nearly always hidden by the jaw. But on these extreme angles, this shape is actually shown. And if you learn how to draw that shape similarly to if you learn how to draw that shape underneath the nose, you can start to sort of add that in on those angles, but on skewed perspectives that are appropriate to the angle that the head is on. And if it's on a very extreme angle, like this one at the top, we're going to see a lot of that shape. Whereas if we're just seeing the chin go up like this, we only just start to see the shape. And there's even this point at which the head has gone up just enough so that we see almost like a flat line where there is no angle between these first two lines, where they become flat. Then of course going down, we don't need to worry about that shape underneath the neck anymore because it's completely hidden. But often when people talk about drawing heads on extreme angles, this is the sort of thing that really throws people off and can be really difficult to make look realistic. So remember these shapes underneath the nose and underneath the chin and jaw area. The other thing to remember, of course, is the position of the ear. So as you follow the eye line around, it connects to the ear at a certain point, and that's when we can start to see that the ear moves around the face based on the angle as well. So on very extreme angles, the ear is quite high or quite low, but always positioned along that eye line. Because they're further apart, the more extreme the angle, the more uppy or downy they will look from each other, but they are always actually along that same eye line. So it's a really useful little key to use to make sure that you're drawing things in the right sort of areas. If you ever get confused, something that I personally find useful when trying to make sure I'm drawing something properly three-dimensional enough is to create sort of three-dimensional guidelines around the face. Obviously, in a head shape like this, it's not going to be very extreme. But when you get to drawing angles like this, it can be really useful, because if we can make sure that we shape our center line well, and then just sort of add these guidelines for our own purposes in understanding how the head is following this three-dimensional space, it can be just a little useful tool to use to help remind our brain that this thing that we're drawing isn't just a bunch of odd lines and shapes, that we're representing three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional canvas. So when drawing the head on extreme angles, those are some of the things I focus on. First of all, we have some key anchor points of the face, the ears in connection to the eyes, the center line of the ridge of the eyes in connection to the distance between the forehead and the tip of the chin. And then of course we have the funky shape underneath the jaw that connects to the neck from the chin, and remembering to draw that where appropriate on extreme angles, and of course remembering the shape of the nose and when to draw that where appropriate. And then the helpful little tip of drawing the head as a three-dimensional object using guidelines to remind our brain that these things are three-dimensional objects. These are all, of course, tools of construction so that we can use them as guides to produce a finished result. And in the end, we get rid of these construction lines, we erase them if they're pencil, and we draw the pen of the finished result, and then we end up with something that looks like it was purpose-built for that, and a little more effortless than it might be in actually producing it. Now, I want to finish off by putting this in some context. Here, obviously, I have a bit of a figure. What I want to do is create a cylinder to go around this figure. This is an imaginary cylinder. The reason I'm using a cylinder is because this can sometimes be a useful guide to create these angles. So I'm going to move this dude over here, and I'm going to create a cylinder on an extreme angle. As you can see, I'm starting off with a very big circle because it's going to be going off into a very little end, and that's how perspective works. And we're going to be using a lot of elements of perspective and foreshortening to make these angles work. Now, of course, if I want to do the opposite angle, I can quite simply copy and paste and then flip vertical, and then I have a cylinder on the opposite angle, and that makes my job a lot easier. To start off, in using the cylinder, I'm going to create center points in the top and bottom of the cylinders and create line between them. Next, with both cylinders, I'm going to start off by drawing the circle of the head. I'm going to draw both of these characters on a 3/4 angle because that demonstrates angles most clearly, I believe. It's easiest to sort of understand visually. Next, I draw in the shapes of the body really blocky, so working from the neck to the torso, then from the torso to the pelvis and legs, and then I add the arms after. The torso and pelvis are the core of the body, so they are usually something I like to focus on earlier, but I'm drawing everything as really rough, blocky shapes and following the perspective angle that is provided from our cylinder. Of course, we have the principle in play that things are larger as they are closer towards you, so The center line of the body, or what you would call the belt line, where a person would wear a belt on their pants, is higher and closer to the head on the angle on the right, and lower and closer to the feet on the angle on the left. And the feet are also much smaller, whereas on the right, of course, they take up a lot of space. Once the very rough blocking is in, and when I say blocking, you can see that it really is blocks of shapes making up the character, then I can start to refine the silhouette. I start to sketch in and start to chisel in edges of where the anatomy would start to come into play. From here, we start to convey our understanding of anatomy, and we do our best to communicate that in the extreme angles, keeping in mind the things that we're applying in regards to perspective and foreshortening to produce a result that our brains can understand and believe. And there you go, you can see as the result there are some more extreme angles, and I've just used a few tools and tricks to make that happen. The cylinder was a helpful guide, and using blocky shapes and using elements of perspective and foreshortening to make the angle extreme but believable are things that are very useful in this sort of application. There are a bunch of relevant videos that I've done on perspective and foreshortening, the foreshortening one of which was directly applied to people and angles of limbs and things like that. So definitely check those out if you're interested in further learning about this sort of thing. And if your hunger to develop extreme angles is unquenchable, make sure to go over to the JAZZA'S Studios shop and check out my stuff there, because aside from those ebooks I previously mentioned, there's also the anatomy reference and pose pack, which has a male and female model on lots of different angles and lots of different poses, which you can use as references and break down and practice those things that we've talked about today. And then of course there's the faces reference pack, which has human faces on 3 angles with very extreme expressions, some of which have very extreme angles on them as well. So I hope this video has been useful. Once again, to recap, we've gone through some angle applications of the body, and then of course the head, and creating those extreme dramatic up and down angles of the face. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, go vote on the future tutorials if you want to pick the themes of future videos. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel to see new content every week. Check out more of my stuff by clicking the annotations over there. You can get the reference files for this tutorial by clicking the link in the description, and if you want the reference files for all the tutorials I've ever made, check out the tutorial archive. If you're looking for a great place to collaborate, explore, or share your own content, head over to newgrounds.com. That's it for now, and until next time, see you later.